I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today is day one of our IMA for Beginners webinar series. Looking at the bottom question on the left, it looks like some of you have not even been able to log in yet, so that's okay. Some of you have been able to log in, some of you use quick search, and not many of you have done much else. Excuse me. So that's fine. So over the course of the next 4 days, we're going to be going over a lot of different tasks that you may need to do within IMA. I did email a few of you that I couldn't find that your ID had IMA access, just to give you a heads up so that you could request access properly. We'll be going over that again tomorrow during the webinar as well. Okay, so today we are going to be covering IMA Basics and Terminology. I am recording today's webinar. I will send out the video link as well as the PowerPoint later this week. You can also go ahead and download the PowerPoint now if you would like to. Over on the right side of your screen above the chat pod, you will see a Files for Download pod. And in that pod, you can download all of the PowerPoints for this webinar series, so days 1 through 4. And you do that by just selecting the PowerPoint and then clicking Download File. Also, I do want to point out to you, up at the very top, you will see a man icon with his hand raised in the menu bar. You can use that if you select the down arrow. You have a few different options. So if you have a question and you're typing out your question, you can always raise your hand, or if I'm speaking too softly, you can ask me to speak louder using these selections. So feel free to use those. And feel free to use that chat to ask questions at any point during the webinar this week. Please put yourself in Do Not Disturb status in all messaging apps and close all email applications until the session is over. That'll ensure that you get the most out of this session that you can. I have muted the microphone, so you will need to use the chat pod to ask questions. If I need to, I can re-enter interactive talk mode at the end of the session for any final questions. So just a quick note about me, since you're going to be listening to me talk a lot over the next 4 days. My name is Mona. I'm the Instructional Design and Training Manager for our Vendor and Item Support team. I own a cat named Tofu and a blind dog named Chloe. I have 3 adorable nephews there in the center, and I absolutely love to travel. So again, today we are covering the IMA Basics and Terminology. Tomorrow we're going to be going over setting up new items in the new item grid. So I did send a note out about the webinar series, just a few points. So first off, this series is intended for domestic vendors only. If you are an import vendor, this is probably going to be a waste of your time. So if you're an import vendor, you should reach out to your sourcing team to find out what training you should be doing once you've been onboarded with Sears. Also, another note that I made was that Day 2 specifically is targeted towards vendors who use our data synchronization process. So what that means is that you sync over information from a data sync provider, and then you work those items through our new item grid. If you build items manually, you do that with specific types of packages. We're going to be going over some of that today, the different types of packages that we have, types of cartons. So if you build items manually, tomorrow may not be the best use of your time unless you're just wanting to learn more about our new item setup process and maybe consider transitioning over. Otherwise, the rest of the days, though, should be relevant to both vendors who are using data sync and those who are building manually. On Day 3, we're going to be going over some different features that are offered within IMA. And then on Day 4, we're going to be going over some maintenance tasks that you may need to complete within IMA. So the purpose of today's session is to introduce you to the IMA Basics and Terminology. After completing this session, you will be able to explain the IMA workflow process and basic role responsibilities, explain IMA Basics and Terminology relevant to vendors, and identify the components of an item in IMA. So to meet those objectives, we're going to be covering the following topics: an introduction, the workflow process of an item components, and IMA terminology. So first off, what is IMA? IMA stands for Item Maintenance Application, and it's basically a new item build database. So anything that's being sold in our Sears stores or our Kmart stores first has to be built within IMA. Until it's built in IMA and it's operational, we're not going to be able to put any orders out for your items. Also, it is a role-based application. So what that means is there are different rows that it goes through. Different rows have different responsibilities, and it goes through in a certain order as well. So we're going to be talking about that in a few slides. IMA is not the order creation system, so inventory is not actually creating orders within IMA. They do use some information, like that KSN number, in other systems to create orders. IMA does not feed every downstream system as well. So we have a plethora of systems that we use here at SHC. And with some of our systems, if a change request is needed, sometimes if you do it in IMA, it's going to reflect in those other applications. And sometimes, depending on the specific field and which application you're expecting it to affect, it may not feed that specific application. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so over on the right side, I do ask a question: do you use a data catalog provider? So go ahead and take a second to answer that. Now, some of you may not know what a data catalog provider is. A data catalog provider, the two most common ones used are going to be OpenText and OneWorld Sync. So to use it as a method of entry, you're completing information with those third-party companies. So Data Catalog is not owned by Sears. Those are completely different companies. And once you complete your information there and we come to an agreement that we're buying those items, you push that information from that third-party data synchronization company to Sears. And then that information is found in IMA, and you locate those items, you bring them into a new item grid, complete some additional information, and approve it. So if you do not know if you use Data Catalog, please talk to somebody else at your company. If you're an existing vendor and you're just taking over IMA responsibilities, you should be able to find that information out from somebody else at your company. Sometimes, depending on how many people work at the vendor companies, sometimes the same person that does IMA also does the data sync part. Sometimes those roles are done by different people. So just ask around and try to find out if you use Data Catalog Provider. You can reach out to IMA Help, and they can try to provide you with some direction, but they may not necessarily be able to answer that question for you because, like I said, the data sync company is a third-party company. It's not actually owned by Sears. But you do need to find that out because that's going to determine how you're setting up your items. So like tomorrow, we're going over a new item grid, and if you don't use a data sync provider, you would be doing manual item setup. Another method of entry we have would be our spreadsheet upload. That's used mostly by merchants and inventory associates. We also have something that's called CMA. It's a cost model application. It's basically it's just a different application where some of our buying teams will start their process there. This is most often done with sourcing. And then we also have Spin. So if an item is going to be exclusively online, it will typically be built in Spin, and then it backfeeds into IMA. So if that's going to be the case, you may not have much to do within IMA itself on your role. We also have manual, so that's really the old school way of setting up items. A lot of our buying teams do this, a lot of our inventory teams do this, and some of our vendors do it. So if you build certain types of cartons, you're required to build them manually. Otherwise, we do require all vendors to be using data synchronization. There are some exceptions to that, mainly if a vendor has been with us for a really long time and they've never made the transition over to data sync, then they may still be building manually when they don't have to. One of the big benefits of using data synchronization is the setup process is much, much faster. You're not having to enter every single piece of information about every single item individually. You can do it for a larger number of items and get those items approved more quickly. So taking a look at some of the responses we got here. So it looks like most of you do use data catalog. Some of you don't know. So again, if you don't know, make sure that you're checking with other people at your company to find out if you're currently set up with one. The most common ones used are OpenText, which is formerly GXS, or One World Sync. And if you do build items manually, if you need help getting started building items manually, you can reach out to the IMA Help Desk for assistance, and they will be able to give you some immediate assistance to start building items manually. Okay, so there's a lot of different information that's put into IMA. This is basically everything starts within IMA for Sears, with any items that we want to sell. So we're going to be discussing some of these fields today. First, we're going to talk about the workflow and the ownership. So our new item setup process always starts with the vendor. The vendor initiates the item setup in IMA. They're going to use their data sync provider to sync information over, and then they're going to pull that into a new item grid, complete some additional fields, and approve. Or if you're building it manually, you'll build those items manually and approve. After the vendor role, it goes to the merchant role. So we use merchant interchangeably with buyer here at SHC. So if I'm referring to the merchant, I'm referring to the buyer. They mean the same thing here. So in that merchant role, they're going to validate some of your entries. They're going to add some merchant-specific fields, such as the retail price, that core item number, if it's a Sears item, as well as maybe some attributes and some other fields. Once the merchant approves the item, it's going to go to your inventory analyst. The inventory analyst, they validate vital information, such as tier group, as well as add inventory-specific fields, such as our season code and reorder instructions. Once inventory approves it, it goes to supply chain. So they're going to validate the merchandise is shipping through the most cost-effective DC tier for DC items. So supply chain is actually partially automated, partially manual. So if an item comes through, and let's say that the dimensions of an item are pretty small, but then the weight of the item is maybe 60 pounds, something like that would get flagged by our system and would have to be reviewed by an actual person before it could progress on to the next row. So after the supply chain row, it goes to the fully system automated rows. So the first one's going to be hold state. So if any of you have done a quick search for items, it's very probable that you have seen that an item is in hold state. So if you see that an item is in hold state, just be patient. Don't automatically reach out to the IMA help or to your buying team. It's going to be in hold state for a little bit. That could mean 30 minutes, or it could mean a few hours, or even overnight. It's running a system of checks on your item, and depending on how quickly the system is currently running, like I said, it could take a little bit, so just be patient. If you see that it's still in hold state the next day, then at that point, it would be appropriate to reach out to the help desk, because if it's still there the next day, there's something that's holding it up. So from hold state, it goes to bridging. Now, if you are setting up Kmart items, it's going to go through bridging really fast and go straight to operational. If you are setting up Sears items, it's going to be in bridging again for a while, just like it was in hold state. During that bridging role, it's pushing information out to our core legacy system. The core legacy system is the Sears system that's used for item setup. It was used before Sears and Kmart combined for SHC, and it's still in existence today. It's still used, but it is kind of more streamlined because now we have a tab specifically in IMA where that information will get pushed to that core system during the bridging process. Once it's finally gone through the bridging process, it becomes operational. So you can see that it can take some time before it's actually going to become operational. Technically, if everybody is waiting for it to come in their role and they process it immediately, it could get through in a single day. More often than not, that process is going to take at least a week. If, let's say that it sits in a task list for a long time, it could take a month or more. So it really just depends on how urgent it is to get it through and how responsive the person managing that task list is whenever it comes into their role. So until an item is operational, we won't be able to order it. So even though you may have completed your part of the setup process, it doesn't mean that it's immediately available for ordering. So there is a link right there if you see view the video at. There's actually a short video that goes over the workflow process. I'm not able to show the video during the webinar because it's with the internet connections, it won't necessarily play correctly. So if you'd like to watch that, you can access that link there. If you download the PowerPoint file from the Files for Download pod, you can access the link from there as well. So any questions so far? Okay, so I do have a question over here. We're going to have a couple of knowledge checks during the sessions this week. So over on the right, true or false, items will be available for ordering immediately after I approve them through the vendor role. So go ahead and take a minute or two to answer that question. So we'll wait just a couple more seconds. Okay, so most people got it right. That would be false. So if you remember, just because you approve them through the vendor role does not mean that they're going to be immediately available for ordering. They still have quite a few rows they have to pass through, and they will not be available for ordering to our systems until the item is fully operational. So great job. Okay, so next we're going to talk about item components. So whenever we talk about an item that's being set up in IMA, let's say a water bottle, like a sports water bottle, we may refer to that as a general item or general piece of merchandise. But within IMA, that item, that general piece of merchandise, is going to have several pieces or components to it. Not to be confusing, but one of those components is also called item. Some of the other components include KSN, packages, vendor packs, and core item. So each of those item components are going to have their own tab in IMA. And then if you were to click on one of those tabs, you would see a lot of information that goes under each of those tabs. So different fields that go under each of the tabs. So this would be if you do, let's say you do a quick search for an item, and you start clicking those tabs at the top, this would be what it would look like. So you would see all of these tabs going across. So the first one we're going to talk about is the item. So the item describes the business unit that your product is assigned to. So it identifies the division and category. Many of you may have heard of something called an SHC hierarchy. So this hierarchy consists of a division, category, and subcategory. So again, not to be confusing, there's also something called a Sears hierarchy. So that's a division, line, subline, and class. So if you're working with a more old school Sears buyer, they may be used to referring to the item using the Sears hierarchy, that division, line, subline, and class. One thing to keep in mind is that division between the SHC hierarchy and the Sears hierarchy, that number can be different. It usually is about 95% of the time. Occasionally the numbers will actually match up, but that doesn't happen very often. So if your buyer keeps referring to a specific division that your items are in, and it's not really making sense, like let's say that's not an item or a division you're set up for in IMA, you may come back to them and ask if they're referring to that Sears division or SHC division, and let them know that you need the SHC division specifically, because that's what IMA is set up to work with. Everything on an item also shares the same store location. So if you walk into a store, turn down an aisle, turn and look at a shelf and you're looking at an item, everything that's on an item in IMA is going to be located in the same exact spot in the store. Everything on an item also shares the same selling price, or that retail price. So an item number is going to be 9 digits. If you have Sears items that you're setting up, that item number is going to be identical to the KSN number. Now, if you do Kmart items, that item number could possibly be different from your KSN number due to a process that we call linking. So I only mention this because a lot of times when vendors hear linking, they kind of form a definition of it in their mind that isn't what we're referring to, and then they'll try to reach out to the help desk because they want to link multiple UPCs to a KSN. And that's actually a completely different process. That isn't called linking at all. So what linking is an inventory-owned function. So you should never be reaching out to the help desk to ask to do linking because that's only owned by inventory. And the linking process ties multiple KSNs to a single item number. This is done mostly for, let's say, transitions on the planogram. So if a specific item is going to be discontinued, but it's being replaced by a nearly identical item, they may link those so that it goes to the same shelf location and also shows up the same on their sales reports. Another reason why they might link could be that you have, let's say, a bottle of shampoo with the bonus 20% extra for free, and then maybe a bottle of shampoo with a small thing of lotion attached to it. So they want those to appear at the same shelf location because it's still just the bottle of shampoo that they're selling. And then it will reflect on their reporting as just the bottle of shampoo versus those differences. So again, linking is inventory owned, so that's not something that you're going to be asked to do. Vendors more mean whenever they refer to linking, they're thinking of adding multiple UPCs to the same KSN. And that's just what it is, just adding multiple UPCs to a KSN. So if you need to email the help desk about that, that's what you would say. So we have an example here. Again, we have like our sports water bottles. The SHC hierarchy, that division, category, and subcategory, the division is sporting goods, so we would know that this would be located in the sporting goods department of the store. Category is accessories, so we know it's going to be located within the accessories section of the sporting goods department. And the subcategory is water bottles. So very specifically, we know it's going to be located with all of the other water bottles within the accessories section of the sporting goods department. So there are 2 types of items that can be built within IMA. Actually there's several types of items, but the 2 most common ones are going to be typicals, which are also referred to as eaches or members, and exploding assortments, which can also be referred to as X's. So typical is what's actually being rung up at the store, at the register. So it could be a 6-pack of soda because it's being rung up as a 6-pack, a bottle of shampoo, or a single shirt. So an exploding assortment is just an assortment of items. So it's not actually going to be sold at the store as an assortment. These are also sometimes referred to as a parent and their children, with the parent being the exploding assortment and the children being the typicals that belong to that exploding assortment. Now some other item types that you might see could be a supply fixture, a class control item. So the best example of this would be curtains because there's such a wide variance of length and width that curtains can be sold as. All they care about is how many curtains are they selling for the reporting. So that would be built as a class control item. Also supply items, so paper towels, the plastic bags at the checkout registers, cleaning supplies, that would all fall under supply. Installation agreement and protection agreement. So if you are a vendor that sells us something like washers and dryers and refrigerators, larger items that have installation and protection agreements, they do have flags on those items, but then those agreements also have to actually be built as an item so it can be rung up at our register. So again, you have all these different item types, but typicals and exploding assortments are your most common types of items. All right, so vendor relevant fields on the item tab. You're going to have your item type, your SHC hierarchy, that division, category, and subcategory, EAS tag required indicator, and default selling price. So if you do a quick search for an item and you click the item tab, this is what it may look like. So let me grab my arrow here. There we go. Over here, this is your item type. So here we can see this is a typical. Right here, this is our SHC hierarchy, that division, category, and subcategory. And you can see each of them have a number along with a description of that number. Now below here, you can see your EAS tag required indicator. So I know some vendors know what this is, some do not. The EAS tag is basically the security tag that sometimes gets placed with specific items. This may go on really nice clothing, or maybe if you sell a drill, like an expensive drill, you might want to include that security tag. So this would be the EAS tag required indicator. And you also have default selling price. So a lot of vendors like to enter this, so I mention it, but just keep in mind you really don't have to enter this field because it's going to be updated by the merchant. Usually the vendor will enter the MSRP, the manufacturer suggested retail price, and that's not something that we typically sell items for. So it will be updated by your merchant, so you don't have to complete this field. Also, one thing I want to point out, you may notice that a lot of these field names are blue and underlined. So these are hyperlinked. So if you're not sure what a specific field is, you can always click it, and it'll open up a separate window with some information about that field, about that term. So any questions so far about the item component? Okay, we're going to move on to KSN. So KSN stands for Key Stock Number. It's a 9-digit number assigned by IMA during initial creation process. So one thing I want to point out is you may not always see it as a 9-digit number, so I don't want that to confuse you. So with most of our applications, and even within IMA, let's say you're doing a quick search for an item, you actually have to leave off this dash and check digit at the very end of the number. So if you include that when you're doing a quick search for an item, it's not actually going to come back with any search results. Also, most of our reporting that we have leaves off this dash and check digit, so you won't see it on most of the reporting either. Additionally, if there is a 0 at the very front of the KSN number, that can be omitted, and the system will just add that 0 in front of it itself, so it'll just know that there's a 0 in front. So you could actually see this as a 7-digit number instead of a 9-digit number. So I just like to point that out so that it doesn't get confusing to you. So your KSN may identify the style, size, color, fabric, and information on merchandising strategies. The KSN is used primarily by inventory to monitor sales and order creation. And one thing I like to call out as well is that I know KSN is proprietary to Sears, and so your buying teams and inventory teams here will typically reference that KSN when they're referring to items, because that's what they're using to track the sales and inventory. So I know as vendors, you're used to referring to your items using that G10 or that UPC. So if there's just a lot of miscommunication going on between you and your buying teams, and say you're confused about what they're referring to, or maybe they're confused about what you are referring to, you may try referring to your items using that KSN instead of the G10. And just know I give the same call out to our buying and inventory teams, because sometimes they don't realize that the KSN is proprietary to SHC, and that you guys are more familiar with that G10. So I give the call out both ways. Sometimes it can be helpful as far as resolving miscommunication. So there's not a whole lot of fields that are relevant to you on this KSN tab. You basically just have your KSN number and your KSN description. So here, up at the very top of your screen, you're always going to see your KSN number. And then down here, you can see your KSN description. So this is the description that's going to show up on a lot of reporting. So any questions so far about the KSN component? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to packages. So the packages contain information on boxes or shipments of products sent to an SHC store. It identifies dimensions and weights, brand, hazard information, country of origin, HTS code, fabric metal content. So you pretty much own everything that's on the Packages tab. There are 3 different types of packages that could be created. So you're going to have your each packages, you're going to have cartons, and there's several different types of cartons that can be created. And then you're also going to have pallet packages, and there are 2 different types of pallets that can be created. Okay, so first we're going to talk about each packages. So we talked about the different item types. So each item has to have a corresponding each package. Also, it's important to know that carton and pallet creation is dependent on each packages. So if you don't have each packages created, you're not going to have anything to put into your cartons and your pallets. So your each packages, those are the ones that get the retail marking number, also known as the RG10 or UPC. Now for most businesses, although not all businesses, this is going to be that 12-digit number. So cartons are going to get a shipping marking number, also known as the SG10, I205, or G1014 barcode. Now there are several types of cartons that can be created. The 3 most common types are going to be your each carton, uniform carton, and exploding assortment carton. So again, those are your 3 most common types of cartons. You're also going to have mixed or assorted cartons and sellable cartons. So first we're going to talk about the each carton. So these are typically going to be your really large items like refrigerators, washer and dryer, bicycle. It's being sold in the same exact box that it's being shipped in. So since it's being sold in the same box that it's being shipped in, this is the only one that requires both the retail marking number and the shipping marking number. So next we have uniform carton. A uniform carton is multiple eaches in specific quantities. So it could be 24 units of the same exact t-shirt, same size, same color, or it could be 12 units of the same exact sports water bottle. Then we also have exploding assortment carton, or excess carton. So this is just an assortment of items. So if it's apparel, it could be 2 small shirts, 4 mediums, and 4 larges. So keep in mind that each of these eaches are going to have their own retail marking number for when they're sold at the store. Once they go into that carton is going to get the shipping marking number. So here's an example in IMA of an exploding assortment carton. Here you can see under package type, it says exploding assortment. And these are batteries. So this is an assortment of, let's say, AA, AAA, C, D, and 9-volt batteries. You can see different KSNs for each of those types of batteries. And each KSN has a specific UPC. And then each UPC has a specific quantity here. Then we can also see our total each quantity for the carton. All right, so again, that each carton, uniform carton, and exploding assortment carton are the 3 most common ones. And those can be synced through using your data sync provider. So moving on to mixed and assorted cartons. These are going to be a little bit different. Um, Most notably, these cannot be data synced. So if you're in a business that requires mixed and assorted cartons, these are going to have to be built manually. This is used most often, I would say, in toys, but there are some other businesses that do use them. They just aren't very common. So typically, mixed and assorted cartons can only be built for items going through the Kmart ordering system. So everything in a mixed and assorted carton does have to have the same cost and selling price, and it's important to note that sales and inventory cannot be tracked for the individual UPCs. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. So a mixed carton is going to be one KSN with fixed quantities of multiple UPCs, and an assorted carton is one KSN with unknown quantities of multiple UPCs. What does that mean exactly? So looking at a mixed carton, this is we have 24 6-ounce bottles of bubble bath, 8 peach, 8 vanilla, and 8 orange. So we know exactly what we're ordering from you, the vendor. Once it gets to our store, we're not able to track the sales at that UPC level. So we don't know how many peach, vanilla, or orange we're selling. We only know how many total bottles of bubble bath we're selling. So here in the system, first off under package type, you can see it says mixed carton. Here, this is the same KSN all the way down. So it's just one single KSN. But there are multiple UPCs, and then each UPC does have a specific quantity. So again, we know exactly what we're getting from you as the vendor. We just can't track it at that UPC level once it arrives to our store. So we don't know which of those scents of bubble bath are selling really well and which ones aren't selling so well. So an assorted carton was unknown quantities of multiple UPCs. Examples could be Matchbox cars, beach balls, swim goggles, or a really common one could be figurines. Let's say Ninja Turtle figurines. So if we order a 20-pack of Ninja Turtle figurines from you, we will not know how many of each of those figurines we're getting. So we won't know how many Donatellos, Raphaels, Leonardos, and so forth that we're going to get. We only know we're getting a total of 20 figurines. So looking here in the system, this is an example of an assorted carton. Just like with the mixed carton, it's just one single KSN all the way down. There are multiple UPCs, but when we look at the each quantity column, it's actually blank. So we do not know the specific number of each UPC that we're getting. We're only going to know the total eaches that we're getting in this assorted carton. So and just like with the mixed cartons, once it gets to our store, we still won't have any visibility as far as which of the figurines are selling and which are not, unless we were to actually walk into the store and look at the shelf that the figurines are located on. So that means it's basically up to you, the vendor, to decide what you're going to send us. So that would be an assorted carton. So a retail carton, which is also known as a sellable carton, is when retail units that contain multiple units inside. So the customer can either buy the entire case, or they can open up that case and pull individual units out to buy. This is pretty much just used with cases of oil and cartons of cigarettes. Okay, so we talked about cartons. Now we're going to talk about pallets. So there are two types of pallet packages, uniform pallets and exploding assortment pallets. So just like with your mixed and assorted cartons, this cannot be data synced, and it can only be built for items going through the Kmart ordering system. So not to confuse you, but that does not mean that you can't ship Sears items as pallets. It just means that you can't build them in the system as a pallet. So if you wanted to ship Sears items as a pallet, then you would create it as either a uniform carton or an exploding assortment carton. And then when you go to ship it, you would place it on the pallet. So again, you can ship Sears items as pallets, you just can't build them in the system as such. So uniform pallet examples include bleach, potting soil, fertilizer. It's just like a uniform carton. And then exploding assortment pallet examples would be back to school supplies, children's assorted size underwear and t-shirts. So these are just like exploding assortment cartons. All right, so I do have a question for you all over on the right. What are the 3 most common types of cartons created in IMA? So go ahead and take a minute to answer that question over on the right side of your screen. A few more seconds. Okay, so for those of you that answered the very first one, exploding assortment, uniform, and each, congratulations, you got this question correct. So it looks like 4 answered each, uniform, and assorted. So assorted cartons are not the most common type of carton. That's one of the ones that has to be built manually. And then the third option, the mixed exploding assortment and uniform. Mixed also has to be built manually, and it's not a super common carton that's built. So the very first answer was the correct one. Exploding assortment, uniform, and each. So great job. All right, so looking at the vendor relevant fields on the packages tab, there's quite a few because again, you're pretty much responsible for all of the information on this tab. You have your package type, your retail shipping marking number, the marking number format, dimensions and weights, hazard information, HTS codes, country of origin, fabric metal content, and package configuration. All right, so this is what the package tab looks like if you were to click on it. Up here at the very top, this is where you can see the package type. So this is what each package looks like. On the next slide, you're going to see that the carton package looks pretty different. So below that, you will see your retail marking number and the marking number format. Further down the page, you're going to see your dimensions and you are going to see your weights. Below that, you're going to see your hazardous questions. So it's really important that this information is completed correctly. If it is not completed correctly, it can cause some pretty bad situations. So a couple of years ago, a vendor did not complete this information correctly, and the item ended up on an airplane. And it was some sort of gas for camping. And it actually started a fire on the airplane while it was in the air. So obviously super dangerous. They were able to contain it and no one was hurt, but it could have ended up so much worse. So please be sure that this information is correct. If you do not know the answer to the hazardous code, reach out to somebody else at your company who is more familiar with the product. But you do need to make sure this is answered correctly. I know there were a lot of fines associated with that mistake. Further down, you will see your HTS code. So some vendors know what this is and some don't. So what the HTS code is, let's say that the driver comes and he picks up your items from you to bring to our DC location. And while he's en route, he gets pulled over by the police, and they ask him to produce a list of all of the items in his truck. That list that he's going to pull out is produced by the HTS code selected during item setup. So I know sometimes it can be really difficult to find an exact match for your HTS code, just because of the way that they phrase some of the things for the HTS codes. So just find the closest match that you can. It's not a huge deal if it's not an exact match because you may not be able to find one. So just find the closest match possible. So below that, you're going to see your country of origin. So you can add as many countries as you need to for this field. If you have a product where part of it's made in China and part of it's made in India, you can add both of those. We do ask if you put the United States as the country of origin that you do answer that truthfully and you know for sure that it's 100% made in the U.S. Because we do have a lot of customers who are really mindful of wanting to purchase products made 100% in the U.S. So do make sure that you're answering that completely. Over on the right side of that, you will see fabric metal content. So be sure that this is also being filled out correctly. Let's say that you have sheets that we're buying from you, and you put down that they are 100% Egyptian cotton. And somewhere down the road, there is an audit on your factory, and they're checking the fabric. And if it's something completely different, then that may cause an issue for you. So make sure that you are entering correct information under the fabric and metal content as well. Okay, so this is what a carton package looks like. So the previous page was an each package, and this is a carton package. So if you look at package type, we can see specifically that this is an exploding assortment carton. So here you can see your configuration. So you always want to double check that your configuration is correct. Otherwise, inventory will not be getting what they're expecting to get from you when they order. And below your configuration setup, you're going to see your dimensions and weights. So your dimensions and weights here, they're not going to be the same exact dimensions and weights as your eaches because you have to take into account all of the eaches that are going in this carton. So dimensions and weights have to align with GS1 standards on cube measurement. If you'd like to look up some more information about that, I did include a link. But the cube is calculated by depth times width times height for both each and carton level. So your cube sum value for that carton has to make sense. So there's a minimum that it has to be. Otherwise, you're going to encounter an error in the IMA. So looking at an example, we're looking at an each, and the dimensions are 5 by 4 by 2. So the cube for that single item, for that each, is going to be 40. The each weight is 5 pounds. Let's say we have 2 items in that carton. So IMA is going to sum the each's cube, and it's going to expect the carton cube to be equal to or greater than the sum. So if you have the carton cube and it's less than the sum cube value, you're going to encounter an error, or if it's grossly larger. So there is quite a bit of an allowance in there because we do realize that each carton is not going to be custom sized for every package configuration that you do. You probably have a set standard selection of cartons that you pull from, or you may include packaging in there like the bubble wrap to help protect your items. So there is an allowance that is available. So looking at this example again, you have your each dimensions of 5 by 4 by 2. That equals a cube sum value of 40. If there are 2 in that carton, then the cube sum value minimum would have to be 80. Then your each weight would be 5 pounds, and your carton weight would be 10 pounds. So I do have just a little math problem over for you on the right. So if there are 10 eaches in a uniform carton, and the dimensions of a single each is 10 by 6 by 4, what is the minimum cube value for the uniform carton? So You should be able to do it in your head. I specifically chose an easier example, but if you need to use a calculator, please feel free to use a calculator. And I'll give you a minute or so to answer this question. Okay, just a few more seconds. All right, so everybody that answered it did get it correct, so great job. So yes, that would be 2,400. So 10 by 6 by 4, so that means the cube sum value would be 240 for an each. And if there are 10 eaches in that uniform carton, you would take 10 times 240, so that would be 2,400. So great job. So just remember that the carton dimensions must be correct or there could be potential charges. So we are more concerned that the carton dimensions are correct than the each dimensions. And the reason why is because we need to know how much space it's taking up on the truck. Otherwise, we cannot plan accordingly, and it does cost money. If we send a truck to you and we are expecting your product to take up the entire truck, and then you only take up half of the truck, that's going to cost money for us because we could have scheduled for another stop to fully utilize that truck space. On the other end of the spectrum, if we are expecting your product to take up half the truck space and we've already scheduled it to have another stop someplace else, then if your product takes up the entire truck or more than half of the truck, we may not be able to pick up the rest of the product that we had planned for, and that would cost money as well. So those types of issues could result in potential charges. There are some exemption rules. So if items are going to be compressed, stacked, or nested, example of this would be pillows. If you put a whole bunch of pillows in a box, you can compress them by pushing them down. If you have something like chairs, those can be stacked, or items that can be nested. Those can qualify for exemption rules. Another example would be if a display is packed within the shipper. Weight results in no exemptions. The carton weight must always align with your each's sum weight. So mobile over Thursday, how to set that, the dimension exception indicator flag. I just realized the time, so I'm going to try to speed up so we can get through the rest of this as quickly as possible. So next we're talking about vendor packs. So an item cannot be ordered without a vendor pack. A vendor pack identifies vendor-specific information such as your order runs, flow type, cost, vendor stock number, projected first in-store date, and ship points. So you own a lot of the information that's on the vendor pack as well. So up here at the very top, this is your flow type. So the flow type describes how an item is flowing from your location to the store or customer. So you will usually get this information from your merchant or buying teams when you get your item setup info. Ownership code, that's usually going to be Sears or Kmart or possibly both. If your item is going to be sold in the Sears store, it would have to have a Sears vendor pack. If it's going to be sold in a Kmart store, it has to have a Kmart vendor pack. Down below here, you can see your cost. So this is the cost you agreed upon with the buying team. Below that, you see your vendor stock number. Some vendors will use this to group like items so they can find them easily in the task list or find them easily in reporting. And then below that, you see your vendor description. Further below, you're going to see vendor applied EAS tag and EAS tag required indicator. So this was also a field on your item tab, so you just want to make sure that these fields correlate together. And then over on the right side, you will see your California Prop 65 questions. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow during the new item grid setup. All right, so inners and eaches. Those were also located here on your vendor pack tab. You actually enter it on your package tab, but this is where your inventory, and this is where you could see it on your vendor pack tab. So inners. Inners are internal cartons within a carton, and they may be broken down in the DC, and the inners shipped to different stores. So as an example, if you have a carton here, and then you have 3 inners, and you have 6 Tylenol PM that goes in each of those inners. The total eaches would be 18, because there are 18 Tylenol PMs. Eaches per inner, there are 6 eaches per each inner, and the number of inners is 3, so that would be 18, 6, 3. Let's say you don't actually use inners in your cartons. That's going to be the total quantity, 1, and then total quantity. So in this example, you have 18 eaches. Those are also considered the inners now, so now it's 1 each per inner, and the total number of inners is 18. So if you have a carton of 10, that would be 10, 1, 10. Carton of 6 would be 6, 1, 6. Okay, so my merchant or inventory analyst has requested that I create a new vendor pack for an existing item. Why would I need to create a new vendor pack? So there are several reasons why you might create a new vendor pack. It could be that you need a new flow type. If your buying team has been if they had you build a DC vendor pack, but now inventory wants to order DSD, you would need a new vendor pack for that new flow type. Or if you have an additional store format. If we've been selling it in Sears and now we want to sell it in Kmart, we would need a new vendor pack for that new store format. A different vendor. If a product has been supplied by vendor A, they're going to stop supplying it. Vendor B is going to come in and start supplying it. Each of those vendors would need their own vendor pack. Change in carton configuration. So if you have, that can also go along with new each, remember. So if you add on a new each and you want a new carton configuration to include that each, that new carton would need its own vendor pack. And then finally, more than one cost. So typically, all vendor packs have to have the same cost associated. But if you, let's say that we've been buying your item and you've been selling it in the 48 continental states, and now we want to start selling it in Hawaii or Alaska or maybe Puerto Rico, there's going to be a higher cost associated with those, and they would need their own vendor pack. So any questions so far about vendor packs? Okay, so I'm going to move on to core item. I know it's 3 o'clock. I'm going to get through the rest of the material as quickly as I can, probably within 5 minutes. If you need to sign off, I will be sending this video link out later this week, so I totally understand. But I am going to go ahead and finish it if you're able to stay on. All right, so looking at core item. Core item is required for all items going through a Sears point of sale. So if it's going to be sold in our Sears store, it's going to have a core item created. That is going to get created when it's in the merchant role. So when you're first getting your item set up, you will not see the core item. Information on that core tab in IMA is going to feed into our core system. You heard me mention that there are 2 different systems. There's IMA, and then before Sears and Kmart combined, there was the core system, and that was what they used for item setup. It still exists today. However, you will never go into core. You will only be doing stuff in IMA, and then it feeds that information from IMA to core. So on the core tab, you will see your div and item. So it's going to be your Sears division, and then the 4 or 5-digit item number. So just like the KSN is used primarily for inventory, sales, and ordering on the Kmart side, that Sears div item is used primarily for inventory, sales, and ordering on the Sears side. So for you, what's really relevant is going to be that core div and item number, and if the item is skewed, the core SKU. If you work on the Sears side, your merchant team usually will provide these to you after an item is operational, and then you actually add these to the tickets on your items before you ship them out. So it's really important that the ticket number is correct, that that core item number is correct on your tickets. If it is not ticketed correctly, the item may ring at the register as something completely different or not at all. And this is not something that's easily fixed. It requires a lot of changes in the background that take quite a bit of time to go through, so it can take 7 to 10 business days to correct this. If the item has not been shipped out yet and you realize it has the wrong core item number on it and the wrong one was provided by your merchant, you may need to reticket these before they get sent out. So any questions about the core item? Okay, some quick key points to remember. IMA setup starts with you, the vendor. Items cannot be ordered until item setup in IMA has been completed, so it has to go through every single one of those roles that we discussed at the beginning today. So if you build each uniform or exploding assortment cartons, you should be using a data sync provider and the new item grid. If you have to build items manually and need assistance, please reach out to IMA help at searshc.com. And finally, something we touched on, I didn't talk too much about, your buyer should be providing you with some information to get started on your item build. Some of this information may include flow, store format, cost, SHC hierarchy, etc. So it really depends. If you always build your items with the same exact flow, same exact store format, that may not be something they'll provide to you every single time. If you have varied options for building your items, then they may need to provide that to you each time. If you've only ever built items, let's say, for the DC flow, and your buyer suddenly wants you to start building something for DSD, you may not actually have that option because your DUNS number has to be set up for it. So if you don't see the option in the drop-down, then you'll have to reach out to your buying team. You'll have to go through part of vendor onboarding, and they'll have to get your DUNS set up for that new flow type. So we'll talk a little bit about that more tomorrow as well, as far as not seeing the options available. I also include just one quick slide for vendor-filled responsibilities. So these are the responsibilities you have that are system required. You may have additional fields that you do complete for your merchant. That's between you and your merchant. But these are what's required by the system. So this will be available in that PowerPoint download over on the right for you to reference. All right, so if you guys have any questions, I'll be staying on the line for a while until everyone kind of signs out. But I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And if you are not sure whether you should be attending tomorrow, feel free to send me an email, and I'll try to help you figure that out. Again, tomorrow